She-Hulk has been under fire recently from a good portion of the public. They're saying it's just another attempt from Marvel to basically become a woke symbol to their audience. Now, I try to stay away from being political on this channel. I try to just talk about the movies and shows that I watch and why I enjoy them, or rather why I don't enjoy them. But we are only one episode deep on She-Hulk, and yet everyone is already up in arms about the messages that it's trying to portray and the stuff that's taken place in just one episode. So today I'm going to be looking at a video by Matt Walsh talking about She-Hulk and basically give my responses to some of the points that he brings up. Regardless of what side you fall on any topic, it's really nice to just hear the other side's opinion and kind of formulate your own counter arguments, and that's what I'm going to try to do today. I'm going to try to keep the sarcasm to a minimum, alright? I got this. So let's break the fourth wall and just Hulk smash our way into this video.
So earlier in the month, it was announced that Warner Brothers would be shelving their new Batgirl film after having already spent $90 million to produce it. The move was devastating for Batgirl's fan.
Get it? Fan, like there's only one.
And this week, Marvel's new series, She-Hulk, debuted on Disney+. Even before the show premiered, the cast had already started using the Batgirl tragedy as a means of morally blackmailing both the studio and the public into supporting their project. A headline on Yahoo News reads,
First of all, who uses Yahoo News as a credible news source? It's like using Wikipedia for all your college research papers.
After Batgirl cancellation, She-Hulk cast and creators stressed the importance of studios supporting female-led superhero projects. Translation, you all better pretend to actually like this bull we produced, or you're all sexist.
Did you Google Translate that quote? Or better yet, did you Yahoo Translate that quote? Because that's not what that quote said at all. That line is basically saying that you should support female-led superhero movies rather than automatically labeling them as some feminist propaganda like you're doing. It's pretty simple, dude. Just don't blow it out of proportion already.
The message is made clear in the article. It says, Marvel boss Kevin Feige...
Did you ask Yahoo Translate how to pronounce Kevin Feige's name?
...was among the first to reach out to Batgirl directors Adil El Arbi and Balil Falah.
You see, I don't even know if he's pronouncing them correctly because I don't know who they are.
Who also worked on Ms. Marvel to express his support after the cancellation news. Likewise, the team behind She-Hulk shared their sympathy. Quote, it is so hard to imagine the disappointment that those filmmakers must be feeling because these projects take years, says She-Hulk director and executive producer Kat Coiro. I've been working on this for years, and the idea of it never seeing the light of day is, well, it must be crushing.
Yeah, any creator that spends years on a project just for it not to see the light of day, they'd be fine with it, right? They'd be okay with that?
Coiro says, it's exciting because just her very existence is a feminist. She's large, she's in charge, she controls her own narrative. The MCU has for a very long time been very male-heavy. There hasn't been a lot of female representation. So it's nice to finally start making some progress in that area.
That's actually true. In the early days of the MCU, there weren't that many female characters around, like Phase 1 and Phase 2, but now that we're kind of sprinkling in little female characters here and there, all the neckbeards have something to be upset about.
In any case, the blackmail worked, and She-Hulk, despite being just as humiliatingly terrible as Batgirl would have been, was allowed to debut and be seen by literally dozens of people.
Another joke about how nobody watches it.
Classic. One particular clip from the show's premiere has been making the rounds online, though, helped by the IMDb Twitter account, which tweeted the video with the caption, ahem, say it louder for the people in the back. The clip shows She-Hulk lecturing regular Hulk about how difficult her life is.
This is where we need to start paying attention, okay? Go into this clip and remember everything that she says, because right now the entire internet is just blowing this out of proportion, all right? It's blowing it way above what it actually is. Just keep that in mind.
Because, of course, the whole reason audiences flock to superhero shows is to hear their favorite superheroes complain and feel sorry for themselves.
What's wrong with superheroes complaining and feeling sorry for themselves? That's kind of what makes them human and relatable. Spider-Man 2 with Tobey Maguire, or even Daredevil's Netflix show, or even Man of Steel, they all show these really well about how difficult it is to balance superhero life and their normal, everyday, average human life. They make harsh sacrifices every day in their lives so that they can protect the people around them and that they can have a better life. Now, I can't relate to being a superhero or having godlike powers, but I can relate to feeling like an outsider or that I'm failing at some sort of life and work balance. So yeah, superheroes are not perfect beings that are not allowed to complain about anything, and neither are women, but we'll get to that. Remember what I said. Listen to what she says in this clip so we can react to it afterwards. Remember everything she says.
Here's the thing, Bruce. I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. But when I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me, I do it pretty much every day, because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult, or I might just literally get murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
Pause right there. Notice how she's talking about some of her average everyday experiences and situations that make her have an emotional response. She didn't mention anything other than that. Let's move on.
As we can see, self-pity is She-Hulk's superpower. Her high-pitched whining is enough to make any supervillain flee out of just sheer annoyance.
You need to fire whoever is writing these jokes for you, because I don't even know how to react to some of these.
Of course, the experiences she describes in that monologue, which was apparently curated from a Twitter thread written by a Jezebel blogger, are all, at worst, mild annoyances. I mean, if those experiences are the worst hardships in your life, then you have led an exceedingly privileged existence.
I don't remember her ever saying that these were the worst things that she's ever faced in her entire life. Not once did she say that. These are not the worst things that she's ever experienced in life. These are things that make her emotional that she faces on her average, everyday, normal life of being a woman. I want you to notice something. I want you guys to notice something. That as soon as she said that these are just some average sort of examples for what she has to do in her normal life to avoid like emotional situations, he immediately turns that into, oh, if that's as bad as your life ever gets, then you have no real means to complain. He is automatically assuming that these are the worst things that's ever happened to her, and that compared to men, she shouldn't complain because these aren't real problems. Like if I was upset one day, like let's say I go into work one day and I'm upset, I'm emotional, I'm a wreck, and someone asks me, what's wrong? I'm not going to immediately think of the worst things that has ever happened to me in my entire life. It'd be more like someone cut me off in traffic and almost hit me in my car. Or traffic is so backed up that it's taken me an hour to get home. Or someone's on FaceTime on their speaker in a public place and they're being super loud about it and so not conscious about the fact that everyone is bothered by the fact that they're being super loud. Or like when people dramatize a situation and blow it way out of proportion just to kind of get their point across. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, Matt?
In trying to explain why her life is so much harder than Bruce's, She-Hulk can only mention the trauma of receiving unwanted compliments and of having her credentials questioned.
Not once did she ever say that she has a harder life than Bruce. Did you even watch the clip? He is talking to her about learning to control her emotions, and she responds with a couple of situations that she has to deal with in her daily life that has taught her to do just that. She says that she controls her emotions infinitely more than Bruce. She has never said that she has a harder life than Bruce has had. And it's actually all true. She's actually better at controlling her emotions than Bruce is. Why is that? Well, if Jen gets to a certain anger threshold, then she starts turning green and starts turning into Hulk, then she can basically coax herself back down and just stabilize her emotions, get the adrenaline back out of her system, and just calm down. And just without hulking out, she can just calm herself down so that she's fine. When Bruce hits that same threshold where he starts turning green, it's no longer in Bruce's hands. It's now Hulk versus Bruce. Because remember, there's another persona in there trying to fight for control of the body, right? So rather than learning to control his emotions, he basically takes precautionary measures to ensure that they never happen, like isolating himself and doing yoga. So Bruce isolates himself from the world to keep his emotional state from spiking, and Jen doesn't really have that luxury and faces emotional situations in her high-pressure situation job, as well as just every day as being a female. She has learned to control her emotions so she doesn't make a scene. You with me? You with me? It's not that hard to understand if you're not trying to project your own agenda onto something that doesn't fit in it. Right, Matt? You would never do that.
And she then says that she can't complain about these experiences because if she does, she'll be insulted or murdered. The interesting thing about this claim is that it's not only delusional and insane, but also self-negating. She clearly has no problem complaining and is quite eager to do so. And far from being killed for it, she's instead hailed as a hero.
Man, you could follow the yellow brick road if you had a freaking tour guide. Let's break this down a little bit so you can kind of start to understand it. For one, she can't complain about things without getting insulted because look what you're doing right now. Belittling her and her problems when she tries to express what makes her emotional or the problems that she faces in her everyday life, and rather than helping her find a solution, you basically belittle her and say they're not problems. So that checks out. And Bruce isn't going to murder her for complaining about her problems. Let's say you go to the bar with your girlfriend and there's some drunk dude getting really pushy and flirting on her. Or flirting with her? Flirting with her. Yeah, there you go, flirting with her. If you're with her, then you can just walk up to him and say, hey, piss off, and he'll probably leave. But if she's by herself, she can't just be like, hey, piss off, because he's not going to leave. The male ego is way too fragile to take no for an answer, right? Way too fragile. The male ego, really fragile. So, one thing leads to another, and he accidentally murders her for her basically trying to push him away and him manhandling her while he's drunk, and he accidentally kills her. Or, he kills her on purpose because he's drunk and he's not going to take no for an answer. I have been at parties where girls are getting hit on by a bunch of drunk dudes, and me and a bunch of other guys have to step in because they're getting rejected, and it's getting really heated because they don't like getting rejected. They don't want to take no for an answer. So just because it's not something that you have experienced does not mean it never happens. Who would have thought?
This is a common theme with the feminists. They claim that they're not able to talk about their troubles, when in fact, that's the only thing they ever talk about. And anytime one of them does talk about it, the others say, yeah, finally someone said it. What do you mean finally someone said it? This is all, we've heard this 1 billion times.
We've heard it 1 billion times, yet we still roll our eyes at the fact that these are still problems, and we don't help them with the problem.
But simply exaggerating your own sufferings is one thing. We can all tend to fall into that trap sometimes. The real problem with She-Hulk's approach here, and with the approach of feminists in general, is the assumption that no man could ever suffer or does ever suffer like women suffer.
And there it is! Round of applause for Matt Walsh for projecting his own agendas into She-Hulk's dialogue. Where, in her statement, did she say that no man has ever suffered like she suffers? Where? Where did she even mention that her life is harder than Bruce's? Where did she mention that? The problem with this whole situation is that men immediately hear her complaining about some things that she faces in her average everyday life and immediately turn that into a dick measuring contest of who has it harder, men or women. She complains about things that make her emotional. Now, I'm not attractive or a woman, so I can't really relate to catcalling, but I can probably figure that it would be pretty annoying. But as soon as women start complaining, men just jump on the bandwagon and be like, oh, men have harder jobs. Men go to war and die. Men commit suicide more. Men get bullied harder growing up in school. It's like, dude, men have become so emotionally fragile that as soon as the spotlight gets taken away from men and women start complaining about their problems, they immediately try to turn it into, well, at least you don't have, you don't have to get drafted into the war, or at least you don't commit suicide at a high rate, or at least you guys are going to school more often. Like, we're completely missing it. It's even funnier because most of the people that pull up those statistics, none of those statistics apply to the people pulling up the statistics. My job isn't very hard. I have not gone to war. I have not committed suicide. I was bullied growing up, but everybody's bullied growing up. I've seen girls get bullied pretty harshly growing up as well. Matt is basically saying that just because women don't have as big as issues as men do in men's eyes, then they don't have any issues that is worth complaining about, so they should just stop, which is ignorant and narcissistic.
She-Hulk declares her struggles to be infinitely more numerous and severe than Bruce's or any other man's.
You see, I don't think he'll ever understand why he is wrong because he's just seeing what he wants to believe. She-Hulk literally never said anything about having infinitely more problems than other men or having a harder life than Bruce. Never said it. If you're going to make something up, at least make it believable. Now, I've heard some pretty ridiculous stuff from feminists, like if you don't adjust the AC so that women aren't cold in the office, then you're somehow being sexist towards women because of the temperature. Yada, yada, yada. But what Matt is doing is literally the exact same thing on the other side of the fence. Instead of women complaining, it's men complaining about how women complain because they shouldn't have anything to complain about because men have it harder in society. No, they don't have it as hard as men in society. Okay? We get it. We get it. But that doesn't mean that they don't have anything that they can complain about. Man, I bet Matt's wife goes to like someone else for her problems, because if she goes to him, he's just going to pull out some big ass iPad and talk about statistics about how men have it harder than women in society, so she shouldn't complain.
There is nothing to be gained by comparing two groups against each other and trying to determine who has a harder time of it. But if that is the game we're playing, most of the statistical evidence would seem to suggest that in modern America, women generally have the better deal.
Yeah, guys, it's really stupid for you to try to say which gender has it harder in America. It's really kind of stupid. But let me explain to you why it's men.
Well, that's why girls are more likely to graduate high school, less likely to be suspended or expelled. Women are less likely to commit suicide, to become drug addicts, to become hopeless, to homeless, to less likely to suffer from workplace injuries. Women are less likely to be the victims of violent crime. They're less likely to be blown to pieces on the battlefield.
How many of those problems do you think apply to Matt? I would say that he can't understand women problems in America because he's not a woman and they don't apply to him, but I'm willing to bet the majority of those don't apply to him either. It's basically universally accepted that women are more sensitive than men. It's pretty much universally accepted. That being said, when women complain about something that men don't see as big as a problem as what men have it, they automatically belittle the problem and say it's not worth complaining about because it's not as big as problems that men have. If someone tells you their problems and the only response that you can come up with is it's not as big of a problem as what I have or what I go through, then you're part of the problem.
But sure, I guess the homeless, drug-addicted, suicidal, war-injured veteran on the street probably doesn't get catcalled very often. So he's got nothing on She-Hulk.
Notice how he pulled the worst of the worst examples when it comes to men, but then she's just basically saying the average everyday experience for a woman. Seems kinda sus there, Matt. Your argument is flailing.
Now, nobody is suggesting that women have no challenges or obstacles to overcome, but the idea that they have more obstacles than men or more serious ones is just not borne out by the facts. I'm sorry.
Are we even talking about She-Hulk anymore? He's just projecting this onto She-Hulk because it's a popular topic right now, and he's trying to get more clicks from smooth-brained individuals that will just blindly agree with him.
And besides, as already noted, the comparisons are absurd and pointless. The only thing worse than being self-pitying is to be competitive in your self-pity. It's bad enough to walk around dwelling on your misfortunes. It's even worse to insist that you win the prize for the most misfortunate person in the world.
The irony of that statement, that's literally what you just did, Matt. You literally just pulled up statistics on how men have it harder and then immediately turn around and be like, oh, it's even worse that you insist that you have it harder than men. That's a little hypocritical there, bud.
And it's especially ridiculous to make this claim when you are a young, attractive woman in the modern Western world.
Yep, if you're an attractive woman, you have nothing to complain about ever in life. Ever. Period. Dog dies? Well, if it wasn't shot on the battlefield, we don't care. Have depression? Well, if you don't kill yourself, we don't care. You get robbed on the street? Well, if it was by a man, clearly he needed that money for more numerous problems than you could ever understand as being a woman. You would never understand what it's like to be a man in America. He needs that money more than you do because you don't have anything to complain about, especially not money. Just give it to him.
This has probably been a more serious analysis of a She-Hulk monologue than was necessary, but someone has to mansplain these things to her, and I was more than happy to step up to the plate.
Let's take a page out of his book and use Yahoo Translate for that quote real quick. Translation, I use She-Hulk explaining her average problems to force my own beliefs into a narrative and to insinuate that I know way more about what she's talking about than what she's talking about, regardless if it makes sense in the context of the show itself. What I'm basically trying to say is that people are projecting a lot of things into She-Hulk's dialogue when it has nothing to do with She-Hulk and the dialogue itself. They're just using She-Hulk as a vessel to push their own agendas like they criticize feminists doing in other projects. If someone has a problem, help them fix it. Don't just belittle their problem, because then if you do, you're part of the problem. Because if you do, we're all just going to go in circles and nobody's going to get anything solved. Hopefully you learned something new or at least thought about it in some new light. Let me know your thoughts down below on the first episode of She-Hulk and this whole situation, because I'm kind of curious what the general public, if there's anybody on my side of this, because it's kind of been blown up out of proportion. Don't forget to hit the sub button if you did enjoy. Have a marvelous day, of course, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!